My name is Tavan Seer. I am, as of this rotation's end, the longest-serving watchpost commander in the Drassic Outer Margin, 32 years at watchpost 11, which sits on the spinward edge of the Veth-Alun exclusion boundary like a single lamp hung at the end of a very long and very dark corridor. I have been offered reassignment 4 times. I have declined each time formally, in writing, with citations from the Margin Protocol that technically permit me to do so. My superiors have stopped asking. There is a certain kind of man that a post like this produces, or perhaps the post finds the man already made and simply keeps him, and I have come to accept that I am that kind of man. I stay because I know what is out there. And I stay because I know that knowing is not the same as understanding, and that the distance between those two words is where every disaster in the outer margin has lived. I want to be careful about how I begin this account, because I have thought about it for a long time and I know the temptations of this kind of telling. The temptation to start with the transmission, to front-load the horror and let everything else explain itself afterward. I am not going to do that. The transmission means nothing without the weight that precedes it, and the weight cannot be felt unless you understand what the outer margin is, what it costs to hold a post on its edge, and what kind of thing the Veth-Alun sector has always been, long before any survey vessel crossed its nominal boundary, long before the Ithari came to my post with their redrawing, long before I spent 31 years deciding what to write and what to leave out of a patrol log. So I will start where the weight starts. I will start with the charts. The Drassic Outer Margin is not a military installation in the traditional sense. We do not patrol it in formation. We do not run tactical exercises against simulated incursions. We hold it the way a border marker holds a boundary, by existing, by transmitting our presence at the prescribed intervals, and by logging what we observe. The watchposts are strung along the exclusion boundary at intervals of roughly 8 light years, close enough that an anomaly in one sector can be confirmed by the adjacent post's long-range array within 2 standard cycles, far enough that each post is, for practical purposes, alone. We are not soldiers. We are witnesses. Our job is to see, to record, and to report. It has always been understood at every level of the margin authority that we are not expected to intervene in what we see. We are expected to survive long enough to file the report. The exclusion boundary itself is a thing that took 3 generations of Drassic cartographers to define, and they defined it not by measuring the territory inside it. That was never attempted, but by cataloging the points at which every mapping effort, every survey transit, every deep-range probe we had ever sent ceased to return data. You draw a line where the silence begins. That is how the outer margin was established, not as a wall we built, but as a shore we identified by the absence of everything that had gone past it. It is a particular kind of cartography. Most species, when they draw a boundary, draw it around what they know. The outer margin is drawn around what cannot be known, which requires a different quality of humility, and a different quality of courage in the cartographers who have to put the line somewhere and accept that the line is provisional, and that the space beyond it has no obligation to stay on its side of what they've drawn. There are 6 distinct exclusion zones in the outer margin. I know their designations by memory. Zone Veth-Alun is the oldest, established 1100 years before my birth, when the Drassic were still a single-system civilization, and the concept of an exclusion zone was so new that the cartographers who drew it had to invent the vocabulary as they worked. Zone Veth-Alun's prohibition is understood, if not well liked. The Shivari Combine occupies those systems, and the Combine has made its feelings about uninvited guests into a doctrine that 3 generations of Drassic diplomats have been unable to negotiate away. We don't go there. We don't especially want to go there. Zone Veth-Alun appears on every chart with the standard yellow-edged border that means contested, approach with authorization, and every pilot in the margin knows what it means. Zone Veth-Alun has a similar history, if more complicated diplomacy. Zone Murakdan is disputed territory, the subject of 900 years of arbitration council filings that nobody expects to resolve in any of our lifetimes. Zone Preth is under navigational hazard designation, dead star, debris field, sensor blanking radiation. And while the hazard designation is maintained by protocol rather than by any living authority, every pilot respects it for the practical reason that dead stars and debris fields do not negotiate and do not care. Zone Aleph Sewer is the newest designation, barely 40 years old, the result of a mapping mission that returned to port with 2/3 of its crew and a mission commander who filed a 2-sentence incident report and then resigned her commission the following morning. I have read the incident report. I will not reproduce it here, but I will say that the 2 sentences it contains are each factually precise and emotionally opaque in a way that I have always found more disturbing than any amount of lurid detail could have been. The sentences do not describe what happened. They describe only the finding, that the zone was entered, and that the mission did not complete. The gap between those 2 facts is where that commander spent the rest of her life, and it is a gap I have some sympathy for. And then there is the Veth-Alun sector. It does not have a yellow-edged border. It does not have a navigational hazard designation. It does not appear in the Arbitration Council's docket, because there is no diplomatic claim to adjudicate and no contesting party to invite to the table. The Veth-Alun sector appears on every Jurassic chart in existence, every chart maintained by every species in the known compact, to my knowledge, with a border that has no standard designation color at all. The cartographers who first drew it used a notation that no longer appears in the official symbology reference, because it was retired as an active symbol 800 years ago and has not been needed since. The notation is a simple thing, a single thin line, unbroken, with no fill and no edge color, just the line itself. In the original cartographic tradition that the symbol comes from, it meant, here the chart ends, not because the space beyond is uncharted, not because it is contested or hazardous or claimed, because the chart simply stops. Whatever is on the other side of that line is not a place that charts are for. Every pilot who trains in the outer margin learns the symbol in their first week. It is the first thing they are shown, before they are shown the routes, before they are shown the comm protocols, before they are shown where the emergency beacons are mounted. The instructor points to the symbol and says, in whatever words they prefer, this is the only line on the chart that means what it says without explanation. And then the instructor moves on, and the chart lesson continues, and no one asks about it, because there is something about that particular line, something in the way it sits on the chart, the way it doesn't call attention to itself the way a warning notation does, the way it simply ends the space it borders and then stops, that makes the question feel wrong to ask, as though asking it would constitute a kind of approach. I was 23 years old when I first saw it. I was a junior relay officer on a margin dispatch runner, and we had come to watchpost 11 to deliver a crew rotation and a supply manifest. And while the outgoing crew was being processed, I had a few hours with nothing to do, and I went to the chart room, and I looked at the long wall of the outer margin survey map that ran the full length of the room. I found Zone Veth-Alun immediately. I had been briefed on it, and I found Zone Veth-Alun and Zone Veth-Alun and the others, each marked with their proper designations, their explanatory notations in the margins, their approach corridors and restricted headings. And then I found Veth-Alun, and I stood in front of it for a long time. I am not a man given to atmospheric thinking. I have been told this by people who know me well and by people who don't know me at all. I approach problems structurally. I prefer precision instruments to intuition. I distrust reactions I cannot explain. These qualities have served me well in a long watchpost career, where the work is the methodical accumulation of small observations over great spans of time, and where the premium is not on insight but on consistency. But I stood in front of that map for, I believe it was 40 minutes, though it may have been longer, and I was aware, without being able to fully articulate the awareness that the thing I was looking at was not simply a gap in the chart. It was the chart's admission of its own limit. Every other zone on that wall had language around it, had color, had the texture of decision-making, the accumulated record of something that had been negotiated or measured or at least described. The Veth-Alun sector had none of that. It had only the thin line, and beyond it nothing. And the nothing felt intentional. It felt like a nothing that had been put there carefully, by people who understood what they were putting it in front of. I was still standing at the map when Commander Seth Vrock, the outgoing watchpost commander, found me. He was a compact man, iron gray at the temples, with the particular stillness that very long postings in isolated stations produce in certain people. He looked at what I was looking at, and he said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You're the relay officer from the dispatch runner." I said yes. He said, "How long have you been looking at it?" I said I wasn't sure, 40 minutes, maybe more. He nodded and looked at the map with me for a moment. Not at the map generally, at that specific boundary, at the thin line and the blank beyond it. We stood there together and neither of us said anything, and I noticed that he did not look at it the way a man looks at something he is used to. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he is still deciding about, even after 7 years. That was the thing I noticed. 7 years at the post, and the line still required deciding about. Whatever resolution he had reached with it was not the resolution of familiarity. It was the resolution of a man who had concluded that the thing was not going to become familiar, and had made his peace with that fact without pretending it was otherwise. He said, "Do you know what's in there?" I said I didn't. I said I'd been briefed on the zone designations, on all of them except Veth-Alun. He nodded as though this confirmed something he already knew. He said, "No one's briefed on Veth-Alun. There's nothing in the briefing materials to put in a briefing. The only notation in the outer margin protocol manual for that sector is a single sentence that says, Watchpost commanders at Watchpost 11 are to maintain passive observation of the Veth-Alun boundary and file standard patrol logs. That's it. Nothing about what to do if something comes out. Nothing about what to do if something comes out and then goes back in. Nothing about what to do if your passive observation registers something that doesn't fit in a standard patrol log. Just observe and file." I asked him if anything had ever come out. He was quiet for a long moment. He kept looking at the map. Then he said, "Not in my 7 years." And he did not say anything else about it, and his tone was such that I did not press. I understood, in the way you understand certain things without being taught to understand them, that the weight of what he wasn't saying was heavier than the weight of what he said, and that the weight was not mine to ask about yet. He had served his 7 years and he was going home, and the weight he had been carrying was not transferable because it was not made of information. It was made of time. Of 7 years of looking at the thin line every morning and every evening and adding nothing to the patrol log except boundary status nominal. Veth-Alun sector, no anomalies observed. He left the post 4 weeks later. I delivered the supply manifest and the crew rotation, and I went back to my dispatch runner and I went about my career. I thought about the Veth-Alun map more often than I thought about most things, which was unusual for me since I am not a man given to dwelling. But it stayed. The thin line stayed. The blank beyond it stayed. And something Vrock had not quite said stayed with it. The shape of something he had chosen not to hand on, which I respected, but which I found myself returning to in the spaces between other work and other considerations. I was 31 years old when I was offered the command of Watchpost 11. It was not a prestigious posting. The margin authority was, I think, slightly surprised that I accepted it. I accepted it for a reason I did not put in my acceptance filing, which is, I had thought about that map for 8 years, and I wanted to be where the map ended. I had been at the post for 11 months when the Kesjardin survey vessel Paravan mast crossed the outer boundary of the Veth-Alun sector. I want to be precise about what happened because I have had 31 years to think about it and I have not always been precise, at least not internally, and I think the imprecision has cost me something. So I will be precise now. The Paravan mast was not a military vessel. She was a Keshardin compact survey ship, registry number KD 7741, operating under a standard deep margin survey mandate from the Keshardin Cartographic Compact, which is an organization that sounds more authoritative than it is, being in practice a consortium of 4 mid-tier species whose shared ambition to expand their mapping database had historically outrun their shared judgment. The Keshardin are not a reckless species. They are a thorough species, which is a different thing, and the difference matters. They had surveyed every other zone in the outer margin, including the approaches to Zone Aleph Sur, which required significant courage or a significant failure of imagination. And the Veth-Alun sector was the last unmapped space in the region they'd assigned themselves to catalog. It was, from a certain formal cartographic perspective, simply the next box on the manifest. The Keshardin Manifest is a real document, maintained with real discipline, and when every other box has been checked, the next box has a certain gravitational pull that is distinct from ambition or recklessness. It is the pull of completion. It is difficult to argue against it from the inside of it. I know this because I spoke with the Paravan mast's mission coordinator before she entered the exclusion zone. Her name was Veth-Alun, and she was a careful, methodical woman who had been doing this work for 20 years and who took pains to explain to me, when she filed her transit notification with Watchpost 11, that her vessel would not penetrate more than 3 light years into the Veth-Alun boundary, that she would maintain continuous passive broadcast on the compact's standard survey frequencies, that she had reviewed the outer margin exclusion protocols and understood the boundary to be an unmapped zone with no formal prohibition on transit, which was technically true, since the Veth-Alun sector carried no prohibition notation in the compact protocol archive, only the absence of a designation at all. No prohibition. Just the absence of one, which is a different thing, but is not a prohibition, and Veth-Alun was the kind of professional who worked from written protocol and would not have read the absence as equivalent to the presence of a prohibition. She was doing her job. She was being careful. She filed the notification and gave me her contact frequency and her estimated penetration depth and her estimated duration, and I am confident she thought she had covered the relevant considerations. I did not try to stop her. This is important to say, and I say it not in self-exculpation. I am not interested in exculpating myself, but because it is a fact and the facts matter. I did not have the authority to stop her. The outer margin watchpost protocol manual had, as Commander Vrock had told me years before, exactly one instruction for the Veth-Alun sector: observe and file. There was no prohibition I could cite. There was no authority I could invoke. There was only the map, and the map's thin line, and my own sense, which was not small, and which I will not pretend was small, that what Veth-Alun was proposing to do was something I did not want to watch happen. I filed the transit notification in the patrol log, as required. I noted the vessel's registry, the stated penetration depth, the mission coordinator's name and contact frequency. I noted the time and the heading. I noted that I had received no guidance from outer margin authority on the appropriate response to a compact member species filing a survey transit into the Veth-Alun sector, because I had not, because no one had thought to write guidance for that, because in the 1100 years since the thin line was drawn on the chart, it had apparently never occurred to the outer margin authority that someone might simply decide to go. The line was its own deterrent. That was the implicit theory. The line and the blank beyond it were assumed to communicate what no written prohibition needed to say. The assumption had been correct for 1100 years, and then it was not. The Paravan mast crossed the boundary at 3:14 local station time. My passive array tracked her transit beacon for 22 minutes and 16 seconds. Then the beacon stopped. This is not, by itself, an anomaly. Survey vessels in unmapped space frequently lose beacon integrity due to local interference, gravity shear, sensor blanking phenomena. The absence of a beacon does not mean the absence of a vessel. I filed a note in the patrol log and continued standard monitoring. Protocol dictated standard monitoring, and I adhered to it, and I sat at my watch station with the careful, well-practiced attentiveness that 31 subsequent years would give me ample opportunity to develop further. And I watched the array, and I waited for the beacon to resume. What happened at 3:41 was not a beacon, it was a transmission. I need to be careful here too. I have described this moment many times in my own head, and I have, over the years, constructed several versions of it, some more dramatic than others, some stripped down to bare fact. I am going to try to give you the bare fact, because the bare fact is sufficient, and I have no interest in making it worse than it is or better than it is. What it is enough. At 3:41 station time, my relay array received a tight band transmission on the Keshardine compact survey frequency. It lasted for 3 seconds and 4/10. The signal was clear, no interference, no degradation, no encryption, which meant that whatever sent it intended it to be received, and intended it to be received clearly. The transmission contained no voice, no encoded data package, no standard distress signal structure. It contained a sound. I am going to say that again, because I think it matters that the precision be maintained. It contained a sound, not a signal with semantic content that could be decoded, not a structured message, a sound, 3 seconds and 4/10 of a sound, transmitted on a tight band frequency that Veth-Alun's vessel had been actively broadcasting on before it disappeared from my array. Something in the Veth-Alun sector had found the open frequency and used it. That is the precise statement of what happened. I heard it. I was on my primary watch station, and the relay array was running live feed through my monitor speakers, and I heard it in real time, which means I heard 3 seconds and 4/10 of something before the feed cut. The feed cut because the authority shut it down. I did not know this in the moment. In the moment, I knew only that the transmission had ended, and that my array was showing a hard signal interrupt rather than a natural fade or a frequency drift, and that a hard signal interrupt of that kind was something I had never seen on a passive relay array in 11 months of operation. It meant something had reached into the broadcast infrastructure of my watchpost from outside and physically terminated the reception, which should not have been possible. The relay array was a closed-loop DRASIC installation, networked only to the outer margin authority chain and to the compact dispatch system. Nothing had the access codes to interrupt it from outside, except the outer margin authority itself, and the outer margin authority had not issued any instruction to my post. I spent the next 40 minutes running diagnostics. The array was intact. The interrupt had been clean, no damage, no corrupted buffer, no residual signal. Whatever had done it precisely, with the kind of precision that comes from complete familiarity with the system being interrupted. I found one external signature in the interrupt log, a code I did not recognize, in a format I did not recognize, which resolved. When I eventually had it identified, 3 days later, by the Outer Margin Authority's technical office, as a direct command channel belonging to the Ithori continuance. The Ithori continuance. I should tell you something about the Ithori, because I don't know how much of their history the people reading this account are likely to know, and the history matters for the weight of what comes next. The Ithori are the oldest confirmed spacefaring civilization in the Compact's catalog. Their own records trace continuous interstellar presence back approximately 40,000 standard years, though Ithori scholars note, with some regularity, that the records they maintain are not the totality of their records, merely the portion they have chosen to share, and that the full archive is considerably older. They do not claim to be the first species to have achieved spaceflight in the galaxy. They claim only to be the oldest that is still present, which is a distinction they draw with a care that becomes more interesting the longer you think about it. The oldest that is still present implies, with the minimal possible drama, that there were others who are not still present, and that the Ithori know something about what happened to them. They have never volunteered this information. The implication has been available to everyone in the compact for as long as the compact has existed, and the compact's collective response has been, broadly, to acknowledge the implication and find pressing business elsewhere. The compact includes 17 member species, of which the Ithori is one. The Ithori participate in compact business with an attention and seriousness that everyone finds reassuring, and that, on reflection, becomes slightly alarming, because species that have been in space for 40,000 years do not participate in the political business of younger civilizations out of genuine civic investment. They participate because they have learned over 40,000 years that participation is preferable to the alternative, which is watching the younger civilizations make the kinds of decisions that younger civilizations make when no elder voice is in the room. This is not benevolence. I want to be clear about that. The Ithori are not benevolent in the way that the word is usually meant. They are practical. They understand consequences in a way that the rest of us understand destinations, which is to say that they see not where a path leads, but what the path leaves behind, and they have a deep and well-founded preference for paths that leave certain things intact. They have never explained their relationship to the Veth-Alun sector, not to the Jurassic, not to the Keshardine Compact, not to any species in the 17-member council, as far as any public record shows. Their representatives on the Compact's Boundary Committee have, when the Veth-Alun exclusion zone has come up for discussion, which happens approximately once per generation, when some newly certified cartographer notices the anomaly in the notation system and asks about it, responded with a single word in the Compact's standard lingua, classified. And when pressed, which happens exactly as often as you'd expect from representatives of a species that has been navigating political rooms for 40,000 years, they elaborate. Classified under Ithori Continuance Standing Provision 7, which predates the Compact, and which the Compact's founding agreement recognizes as superseding Compact disclosure requirements in matters pertaining to what the provision's original language calls anterior safety. Anterior safety. A phrase coined before the Compact existed, before the Compact's founding members were spacefaring, before, by any estimate that any Compact scholar has been able to construct, most of the Compact's member species ancestors were doing anything more sophisticated than noticing the stars. Nobody pushes. This is not cowardice. It is the accumulated wisdom of Compact politics, which is that the Ithori have been right about anterior safety more times than anyone has been able to count, and that the entities which have pushed, historically, in the kinds of records that are old enough that their contexts require extensive footnoting, have tended to produce the kinds of outcomes that eventually result in a new entry in the Ithori Standing Provision Archive and a new notation on somebody's chart. The push and the outcome and the notation. That sequence has repeated itself in various configurations across the full span of Compact history, and the lesson has been learned not in the abstract but in the specific, by species who no longer exist in the forms they had when they decided to push. The Ithori have watched this sequence long enough to have stopped regarding it as a lesson and begun regarding it as a physical law, like gravity, like the expansion of matter in cooling space. A thing that happens when the conditions are right and does not ask permission and does not provide exceptions. Their relationship with the Veth-Alun sector in that context is not mysterious if you know how to read Ithori behavior. What they do not explain, they consider unexplainable. What they consider unexplainable, they have found over 40,000 years, tends to be precisely that. The Compact scholars who have tried to map the things the Ithori have declined to explain against the things the Compact has subsequently encountered, with and without the Ithori's guidance, have found a correlation that none of them put in their published work, because published work requires a methodology, and the methodology for this particular finding does not survive peer review. The correlation is simply, if the authority won't talk about it, it has always turned out to be something worth not talking about. Every time, without exception. And without exception is a standard of evidence that very few things in compact history achieve, but the authority's record on anterior safety has achieved it, across time spans long enough to make the correlation functionally equivalent to certainty. So, when I identified the interrupt code as authority, I sat with what I was holding for a while. I was 11 months into my first posting at watchpost 11. I was 31 years old. I had heard 3 seconds and 4/10 of something that I did not have a category for, transmitted from inside the Veth-Alun sector on a frequency belonging to a survey vessel that was no longer registering on my array, and the authority continuance had reached into my station's relay infrastructure in a way that should have been impossible and shut the sound off before it could be heard any further. There was a deliberateness to that. To the precision of the interrupt, to the timing of it, to the fact that it came at 3 seconds and 4/10 rather than at 1 second or at 5. As though 3 seconds and 4/10 was an amount of time they had a policy for. As though there was a threshold they were managing. I filed the patrol log entry. I reported, survey transit notification received, transit confirmed, beacon loss at 3:36, anomalous transmission received at 3:41 lasting 3 seconds, transmission terminated via unidentified external interrupt at 0341:03. I logged the interrupt code in the technical annex. I marked the entry for escalation to outer margin authority priority review. I did not describe the sound in the log. I have not described it in any log since. The priority review response came back in 9 hours, which for outer margin authority was a speed that itself communicated something. The response was brief. It acknowledged my report. It confirmed that the interrupt code I had logged was an authority continuance command channel and that the authority had been notified of the channel's activation. It told me to continue standard monitoring. It told me that my log entry had been forwarded to the Compact's Boundary Committee for review. It told me nothing about the Paravan mast or Sevath Dan. I continued standard monitoring. The Paravan mast did not reappear on my array. I sent a standard welfare inquiry on the Compact survey frequency every 6 hours for the next 4 standard days, as protocol required. No response was received. The frequency remained clear in the way that frequencies remain clear when nothing is listening on the other end, not the static of interference or the background noise of an active but unresponsive system, but the particular flat silence of an open line that nothing is using because nothing is there to use it. I noted this in each log entry. Welfare inquiry transmitted, no response received, frequency clear. I noted it once per entry with no elaboration, because elaboration on an absence is not evidence, it is interpretation, and my job was evidence. I spent the days in between the welfare inquiries working through the things I had access to. I pulled the archive records on the Veth-Alun boundary, all of them, going back to the original notation. There were not many. The original notation entry was the most substantial, a 12-paragraph document written by the lead cartographer of the Jurassic Third Deep Survey, 311 years into the Jurassic spacefaring history, describing the process by which the boundary had been established. The document is largely technical, survey methodology, triangulation of the silence points, the decision process for choosing the notation. But it ends with a single paragraph that is not technical at all, and that the lead cartographer seems to have been aware was not in the register of the rest of the document, because she prefaces it with an apology for the departure. The paragraph says that she is including a personal observation because she does not know where else it belongs, and because she believes that future cartographers should have it even if they choose not to credit it. The personal observation is, the silence has a quality that interference and debris and hazard do not. Those silences are random. This one is even. She had done enough survey work to know the difference between the silence of an empty zone and the silence of one that is occupied. This one, she wrote, is occupied. She had no other language for it. She was sorry not to have better language, but she wanted it in the record. She had put it in the record 311 years into the Jurassic spacefaring history, which was approximately 1100 years before my posting, and in the 1400 years between her notation and my 8 days of welfare inquiries, no one had added to it. Not a word, not a supplementary note. Not a single patrol log entry across the entirety of the Watchpost 11 archive, which was substantial, covering more than 200 years of continuous post-operation, that described the Veth-Alun boundary as anything other than nominal. On the 5th day, I filed a missing vessel report. On the 8th day, the Outer Margin Authority dispatched a retrieval flight, a compact multi-species team, 3 vessels, which was unusual, since retrieval operations in the outer margin were typically single-vessel missions. I tracked their approach on my long-range array, and I noted that they assembled at the outer boundary of the Veth-Alun sector and held its station for approximately 6 hours without entering. I watched them hold. I noted their position and their heading, which did not change. They had arrived with the intent to enter and retrieve, and they were not entering. This was not equipment failure. They were holding deliberately, and the only explanation for deliberate holding at the boundary of the Veth-Alun sector on a retrieval mission was that they had information that I did not have, and that the information was the reason for the hold. The Ithori arrived while the retrieval flight was holding. 3 Ithori vessels, and I will tell you that 3 Ithori vessels at a single location is a thing that, in the full context of compact space, carries a weight that the number alone does not convey. The Ithori maintain a very small active fleet presence. 3 vessels in one location means they considered this important enough to consolidate, and the last time an Outer Margin Authority record shows the Ithori consolidating 3 vessels at a margin boundary point was 411 years ago, in the events that preceded the establishment of Zone Aleph Sewer. I had to go into the archive to find that comparison, but once I found it, I spent a considerable amount of time sitting with what it implied. 411 years. And before that, in the records that the Jurassic Archive maintains in full, I could find no earlier instance, which meant that in the 11 centuries of the Jurassic outer margin's existence, the Ithori had consolidated at a margin boundary exactly twice, and I had been at the post for both. The Ithori transmitted to the retrieval flight on the compact open channel. I received the transmission, as all posts in range were required to by standing monitoring protocol. I recorded it. What they said was 3 things. The first thing, the Paravan mast was not recoverable, and the retrieval flight was to cease approach and withdraw to their home ports. The second thing, the outer margin boundary of the Veth-Alun sector was being extended. They gave new coordinates. The extension pushed the boundary outward by approximately 4 light-years in every direction, which meant, I did my own calculations before the updated charts arrived, that Watchpost 11 was now inside the extended exclusion zone. And the third thing, an Ithori representative would arrive at Watchpost 11 within 48 hours for a boundary consultation under Continuance Standing Provision 7. I acknowledged. I had no other appropriate response. I filed the record of the communication. I filed a note that the Watchpost was now technically within the new exclusion boundary pending updated chart distribution, and I went about the remaining 14 hours of my watch. I was methodical about it. I have always been methodical about the watch, because the watch is the thing that can be done, and doing the thing that can be done is the only productive response to a situation in which most of what is happening cannot be done anything about. She arrived at 37 hours. Her name, or rather, the name she gave me, which was a compact lingua rendering of something that I was told was a portion of a significantly longer Ithori formal identification, was something I will render in writing as Veen Surath, which is not precise, but is the closest the compact lingua can manage. She came alone. She was, I will try to describe this carefully, tall, by Drassic standards, and the impression of age was not a visual one in the conventional sense. The Ithari do not show age the way the Drassic do, in the graying of hair or the deepening of lines. The impression of age came from something else, something that I think is related to the way she moved, and the way she assessed everything in the room in the first moment she was in it, including me, in the flat, unhurried way of something that has had a very long time to get precise about what is worth looking at. She looked at the watchpost with the particular attention of a person inspecting something they have reason to know well, even if they have not personally visited it before. She knew what the post was for. She had decided, before she arrived, exactly how much of what she knew she was going to share with me. I understood this within the first few minutes of her being in the room. We sat in the watchpost's meeting room, which is not a large or impressive space. She looked at the outer margin survey map on the wall, the same one I had looked at 8 years before in this same room, and she looked at the thin line of the Veth-Alun boundary for a moment, and then she looked at me. She asked me what I had heard. I said I had logged an anomalous sound transmission, 3 seconds in duration. She asked me again, what had I heard? I understood the distinction. She was not asking about the log entry. She was asking about the sound, and I found in that moment that I did not want to describe it to her, not out of caginess or political calculation, but because describing it felt, in some way I could not make precise, like taking it out of the place in my mind where it lived and putting it somewhere it would be more real than I wanted it to be. I had spent 8 days deciding that the sound was a thing I had experienced and would continue to have experienced, and that this was sufficient, and that adding to it by describing it would not make me more informed about it, and would not help the paraffin mast, and would not change the extension of the boundary. It would only make the sound more present. I told her, I heard something large acknowledge the survey vessel's arrival. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, that is accurate. I asked her what it was. She said, the compact designation for what is in the Veth-Alun sector is pending review. The Ithari designation is not available for sharing under continuance standing provision 7. I asked her, how long has the Ithari known that it was in there? She looked at the map again. She said, longer than this post has existed, longer than this watchpost system has existed, longer than the Drassic have been a spacefaring civilization. I asked her if she was going to tell me what it was. She said no. I asked her if it was dangerous. And this is the thing she said that I have thought about every single day for 31 years. She said, without hesitation, without what I can only describe as the usual diplomatic friction that species apply when they are navigating a difficult answer, it is not the dangerous thing in the Veth-Alun sector that we are maintaining the boundary for. I did not say anything. I was not capable of saying anything in that particular moment. She said, the boundary is maintained for what is in there with it. And then she stood, and she thanked me for my service at the post, and she said that the updated boundary charts would be distributed to all compact members within the standard cycle, and that Watchpost 11's patrol mandate would be revised to reflect the new exclusion coordinates, and that the Ithori continuance appreciated the Watchpost's continued passive observation function and expected no change in protocol. She said that if the transmission sound appeared in any future log entries, the Ithori continuance would consider it a breach of boundary protocol and would seek compact council review. She was very precise about this. The transmission sound, not the event, not the record of the event. The sound itself, appearing in a log entry, as text or transcription or description of any kind. I said I understood. She left. She did not look at the map again on her way out. I noticed that, that she had looked at it when she arrived and had not looked at it when she left, which told me something about what the map represented to her versus what it represented to me. For me, it was the limit of what could be known. For her, it was something she had been looking at for long enough that looking at it again had nothing to add. The thin line, the blank beyond it, these were not questions for her. They had been answers for a very long time. What the answers were, she had not told me, and she had made it clear that she was not going to, and I respected this the same way I had respected what Vrock had chosen not to hand on, as the appropriate management of a weight that cannot be transferred without consequence. Some things are held by the person who came to hold them. The transfer would not make the new holder more capable of bearing it. It would only distribute the weight without reducing it, and a weight distributed to insufficient bearers does not become manageable. It becomes multiple collapses. The 3 Ithori vessels departed the area within 6 hours of her departure from my station. The retrieval flight withdrew. The updated charts came through in 36 hours, and I spent a long time looking at the new thin line, 4 light-years further out than the old one. The same notation, the same nothing beyond it, just the line and then the blank, and I thought about a few things in succession. I thought about Seveth Dan, who had been a careful and thorough woman, and who had been doing her job, and who was the kind of professional who filed proper transit notifications and stated her penetration depth in writing before she crossed. I thought about the fact that I had received no documentation about the paravan mast beyond the authorities' notification that it was not recoverable, and that I had filed the welfare inquiry for 4 days and the missing vessel report, and that these filings had disappeared into the compact authority chain without producing any information that I was given. I thought about the fact that whatever the paravan mast had found, and it had found something, and it had transmitted back about it for 3 seconds and 4/10 before the transmission ended, had been in there when the vessel arrived, had been in there presumably for longer than the Jurassic had been a spacefaring civilization, and had apparently never transmitted before. Not in Seth Vrock's 7 years. Not in the 11 centuries since the thin line was first drawn. One transmission. One moment when something in the Veth-Alun sector chose to make sound, on a frequency it had no business knowing, in a way it had no business being capable of. And I thought about what Veen Surath had said, and the order in which she had said it, and the fact that she had said it without hesitation. It is not the dangerous thing in the Veth-Alun sector that we are maintaining the boundary for. The boundary is maintained for what is in there with it. I thought about the human-designated sector. I want to be careful here. I have been careful about this for 31 years. I have never written it in a log. I have never said it aloud to another person. But I am composing this account, this personal account, which is not a patrol log and which is not an official document, and which I have told myself for 31 years I would compose when I could find the right starting point. And I think it needs to be in here, because without it the account is not complete, and I am a man who does not produce incomplete accounts. The Veth-Alun sector, according to the Compact's navigational atlas, borders 3 zones of compact map space, and 1 zone that the atlas designates with a notation I have already described at length. The 4th border is the one I am talking about. In the compact atlas, the zone on the other side of that 4th border is marked with a standard designation. Not the Veth-Alun thin line, not any exclusion notation, just a standard sector designation, gray-lettered, the kind of notation that means mapped, monitored, known. The sector is known. Its primary systems are cataloged. They support life, complex life, technological civilization-grade life by the Compact's measurement standards. The species that inhabits those systems is not a Compact member. This is not because they have not been invited. The Compact's contact protocols are clear. Any species achieving the relevant technological benchmarks is formally invited to observe Compact proceedings and is eligible for membership upon petition. The invitation was extended. It was extended formally, through the Compact's first contact framework, approximately 600 years ago, by a compact delegation that traveled to the boundary of those systems and transmitted the standard contact package on the standard frequencies and waited the standard response window. The response that came back was not a petition for membership. It was not a formal diplomatic reply. It was, according to the classified record that I have spent 31 years in positions of sufficient seniority to eventually read the summary of, a message in the compact's own lingua, which the species in those systems had apparently decoded from the contact package without difficulty, that thanked the compact delegation for the invitation and declined it, and asked the compact delegation, in terms that the delegation commander described in her own report as polite in the way that certainty is polite, to withdraw to their home systems and not return. The delegation withdrew. They did not return. The species in those systems has not communicated with the compact since, in any medium the compact has been able to detect. The compact atlas marks those systems. It marks them as inhabited. It marks them as technologically advanced. It marks them with a gray designation that tells any pilot who reads it, known, and it tells them nothing else, because there is nothing else in the public record. There is only the known and the invitation and the polite withdrawal request and the 600 years of silence since. 600 years in which the compact has detected nothing emerging from those systems, no expansion, no signal traffic beyond the single reply, no probe, no vessel, and nothing entering them from outside either. They have been for 6 centuries simply present, still, occupying their space without apology or explanation and declining, by implication, to explain themselves to anyone who might be interested. And adjacent to those systems, separated by the 4th border of the Veth-Alun sector, is the thin line. I have never been able to establish whether the Ithori have a designation for the species in those systems. Their compact delegate has never addressed the question in council. Veen Sureth did not address it in my meeting room. But I have thought about the order of the Ithori's concern, the thing they are keeping the boundary for, and I have thought about the direction from which that thing would have had to enter the Veth-Alun sector to be there now, and I have thought about the one transmission, the sound of something large acknowledging an arrival, and I have thought about the fact that in 600 years of monitoring the 4th border, the compact has detected nothing. No vessel, no probe, no transmission, no energy signature. Moving from those systems into the Veth-Alun sector, nothing going in, nothing coming out. Which means either the thing that is in there with the dangerous thing entered from another direction, or it entered so long ago that the compact's monitoring did not exist when it entered, or the compact's monitoring is not capable of detecting what the movement looked like. I have never found a way to make any of those 3 possibilities feel better than the other 2. I have tried. There was a period, perhaps 5 years in, perhaps 6, when I made a disciplined effort to approach the problem analytically, to treat it as a question with a bounded solution space, and to work through the possibilities with the methodical attention that I bring to patrol, logistics, and equipment maintenance, and every other tractable problem that the post generates. The effort failed. Not because the problem is intractable. I suspect it is not, for a mind that has had 40,000 years and the full Ithori archive to work with, but because I am not that mind. I am a Jurassic watchpost commander with 32 years of patrol logs and 3 seconds and 4/10 of sound that I cannot write down. The problem is not within my reach. What is within my reach is the post, and the boundary, and the lamp, and I have concluded that these are enough. They are what I have been given to hold, and I will hold them. My name is Tavin Seer. I am the longest-serving watchpost commander in the Jurassic outer margin. I have declined 4 reassignments, and when I am eventually asked to explain why, by the authority, by my successors, by whoever reads this account after I am no longer in a position to explain it in person, the answer is the one I have been carrying since that morning, which is this. Someone should be here. Someone should be at the lamp at the end of the corridor, filing the logs, watching the thin line. Someone who knows what was said in this room and what was not said, and what was said on the way out the door. Someone who heard 3 seconds and 4/10 of something that the oldest civilization in the compact spent 19,000 years not knowing about, and who has kept it out of the official record per instruction, and who understands precisely what that means. Not that the sound is gone, but that it is only gone from the record. The record and the thing are not the same. The record can be sealed. The thing that made the sound cannot be unsealed by sealing the record of it. It is in there. The Ithari know it is in there. And whatever is in there with it in the fourth border systems, 600 years silent, politely asked the compact to look away, knows it too. She said a thing on the way out the door that I have not written in any document until this one. She said it quietly, in the compact lingua, with the slightly different cadence that the Ithari use when they are speaking from their own archive, rather than from the current diplomatic context. She said, "The Veth-Alun sector has been on our charts for 19,000 years. In that time it has transmitted once. Today." She said, "We did not know what was in there with it until today." And then she left. I have stood at the chart wall of this room many hundreds of times since that morning. I have stood at the point where the thin line runs, at the new coordinates, 4 light-years further out than the old ones, and I have looked at the blank beyond it, and I have thought about what it means to maintain a boundary for something you did not know was in there for 19,000 years, and what it means to know about it now, and what it means that the thing which revealed it was not a compact incursion, and was not an Ithari monitoring effort, and was not any kind of deliberate investigation at all, but was simply the arrival of a small survey vessel crewed by a thorough woman who had worked her way through a survey manifest and reached the last unmapped box and gone. I have thought about the 3 seconds and 4/10 of sound that came back. I have thought about the fact that the sound came from inside the Veth-Alun sector, on the Paravan mast's survey frequency, which means it was transmitted on equipment belonging to the Paravan mast, or on equipment that had access to the Paravan mast's active broadcast credentials. I have thought about that for 31 years, and I have not found a reading of it that I prefer to any other. The chart still ends at the thin line, the blank is still blank, the lamp is still lit. I keep the lamp lit because the alternative is darkness at the edge of something I heard once and cannot describe in any official document, and I have decided, after 32 years, that the lamp is better. That someone should be here, with the knowledge of what was said and what was heard and what has not been written, standing watch at the place where the chart stops. That is all I have to say. The log is current, the boundary is intact, the post is at standard operation. I will not speak of the sound again.